Hello, Beat Check listeners. I'm Gosia Wozniacka, and I'm the environmental justice reporter at the Oregonian. Today, I'm with Dr. Jillian Gregg. She's an ecologist and the principal investigator of Terrestrial Ecosystems Research Associates. It's a research group based in Corvallis that does experiments to determine the impacts of human-caused climate change. Dr. Gregg also teaches courses related to climate change at Oregon State University. And today, Dr. Gregg and I are going to talk about a new climate report, which was published at the end of October. That report warns about the potential collapse of the Earth's natural and socioeconomic system. That sounds pretty dire indeed. And if it makes you despair and immediately stop this podcast, I want to guarantee that we're going to actually focus our conversation on solutions and on what we can do to slow the crisis. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gregg. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So for starters, let's just briefly talk about the study itself or the report. How bad is the situation now, according to your research? What's new in 2023?
Okay, so we have been tracking 35 different vital signs of the planet, and we have found that 20 are at their all-time record levels. This is a big concern for us because of the massive step change in conditions that happened this year. Rather than a gradual linear change, there's been abrupt changes in many variables all at the same time. And these changes are far beyond any that humanity has experienced.
Got it. Can you give us some examples of the
So
some of these
I can't go through all 20 in this short time, but I'll just highlight the top three. Is that we were first astonished by the North Atlantic Sea surface temperature, which reached a full degree Celsius above normal by May. So compared to air temperature, it takes far more energy to warm the ocean. And oceans were a full half a degree Celsius higher than any time in the last 30 years. So this rise in the ocean temperatures were followed by record-breaking Antarctic sea ice melt, which was twice the rate for July and August as for the past 30 years. Then those changes in the ocean temperature and the ice melt then also led to global surface temperatures that started breaking records in June. So we've had 38 days with global average temperatures that were greater than 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold above pre-industrial levels. And that was by the time we had submitted the paper for publication in mid-September, when our paper went to press. So until this year, this was a very, very rare occurrence.
And I think, most of our listeners can relate, especially to that last one, because that's something that we all feel as the temperatures go up higher every year and stay high for more days than in previous years. So I think people are starting to understand that particular change. They may not see the sea level or the ice that's kind of a more removed, but the temperature is something that we all feel. Your report uses some pretty stark vocabulary, very strong language. It says life on the planet is imperiled. We're on the brink of collapse. It kind of feels like, we're reading these headlines that we see often related to climate change. It's kind of alarmist and alarming, very alarming to all of us, obviously. Was that a deliberate decision that you, as authors, made to use that kind of language and those phrases?
Well, yeah, we don't see ourselves as alarmists at all. We're simply looking at the data, and we've been looking at the data and reporting on it every year for years, and 5 years now. And as we look at the data, we are alarmed. And so that's really the only way to express it is, we were very concerned about these wide margins that many climate variables and many records were broken. And so it's not just that the records were broken for a short period, but they continued through the summer and many even until now. And in this cascading fashion where warmer oceans led to melting ice, and both the warmer oceans and the melting ice then lead to warmer air temperatures, and these all lead to more climate disasters, heat waves, floods, hurricanes, and fires. The Canadian fires this year produced over a gigaton of CO2, which was nearly twice the emissions from Canada from fossil fuels. So,
yeah, pretty bad. One of the issues, I think, when people read about what's happening and predictions for the future is that we're bombarded with headlines in news stories, or we read books and watch TV, and they all are telling us that our planet and humans are in deep trouble. And many people are very, very anxious about climate change. It's starting to impact people's mental health. I guess why publish another report on dire climate predictions? And how do you, as scientists who publish these studies year after year, how do you deal with this issue of people being overtired by the headlines and by the bad news?
Well, we feel like our job as scientists is to look at the data and get the word out. So imagine if you were a doctor and your patient has cancer, are you just not going to tell them? So we feel that we're simply reporting on the state of the climate and letting folks know that we are moving into a climate system that humans have never experienced. And we are calling this uncharted territory. So at the same time, we realize that climate anxiety is very real. We first heard about climate anxiety with Greta Thunberg, or it became very well known. She stopped speaking and eating because all she heard about climate change, yet she also didn't see any action underway. And she was just paralyzed. And so it's really important to recognize that climate anxiety, it's actually a very realistic concern. So it's not just anxiety for no reason. I'd say it's quite realistic. And the best way to combat it, or to combat climate anxiety, is to find a way to take action. So, and that's what Greta herself has done.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that, the action. We promised to talk about solutions. According to your report, what steps are needed to improve the situation and get us out of this dire position that we're in?
Okay. Well, once we were all on the same page, which in general I would say we are, that yes, the globe is warmer. Yes, human emitted greenhouse gases are causing the warming. And yes, warming is responsible for the large tolls, both economic and in the loss of human life, to heat waves, hurricanes, fires. We even hear this on the, and when we begin to hear this on the news with these new real-time attribution studies coming from the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford University, and you can see them summarized by Carbon Brief, that they've summarized 504 extreme weather events and found that 71% of them are due to anthropogenic climate change. So once we're all on the same page that it's warmer, the greenhouse gases are causing the warmer, and it has these large tolls, the real question then that you're asking is, what can we do? So what we urge for in our report is transitioning to a global economy that prioritizes human well-being both now and in the future, and therefore it stops overconsumption and excessive emissions. So that's still a lot of big words. So specific recommendations that we recommend are eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. So subsidies are actions by governments that artificially lower the cost of energy production, so they ultimately lower the prices that we pay. So those are in no way helping. But subsidies roughly doubled between 2021 and 2022. They had been already $531 billion, and now they're over $1 trillion. So We believe that we need to adopt international coal elimination treaties and also fossil fuel non-proliferation treaties, and these will be very important. But also, we need to scale up the protection of forests and natural ecosystems because they all photosynthesize, and photosynthesis is the main negative feedback loop, or dampening feedback that helps to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere. And we always like to point out that all climate-related actions must be grounded in equity and social justice. So extreme weather and other climate impacts disproportionately impact the poorest people and countries, and and those people have contributed the least to climate change. So, yeah.
I guess one of was follow-up question I have here is, when you talk about phasing out fossil fuels or eliminating coal, sometimes people get really frustrated because they say, well, I live in Oregon, we only use a tiny percentage of coal from out of state. It's China or it's India that is using coal or, in contributing to the problem, and we can't do anything about that. So how do you answer that, question of like, it's not in my backyard, or even my immediate local government can't do much?
Well, I would say that while we're not using much coal, we still are using natural gas. And all Oregonians need to, at home, as gas appliances become defunct, everything needs to be electrified. We need to have the heat pump heaters that work quite well in our state, heat pump hot water heaters. We need electric cars. If you can have solar panels on your house, which are now essentially free. I got solar panels back in 2016 and have not paid an electric bill since, and that is all paid off. So people, I teach that stuff, and before I taught it, I hadn't bought it either. So all you really need to do is go and look at the numbers to see how much money you can save right now by electrifying your homes. And you can, there's a website called rewireamerica.com, and that tells you how to take advantage of all of the great benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act. And fortunately, even if you don't have solar panels on your home, as you make your whole home running on electric, Oregon itself will eventually only be supplying renewable energy. So all of your electric will be coming from renewables in the future.
So one of the solutions that you include in your report is transitioning towards a plant-based diet. Can you please talk a little bit more about why you decided to include that?
Yeah. So cattle belch methane, and they also eat, much of our crop production. Many of our crops are grown in order to feed the cattle. And then once they're grown to feed the cattle, they have to be transported to where the cattle are. Cattle also need pasture. So much of our destruction of tropical rainforests is due to slash and burn agriculture so that pastures will be available for cattle to graze on. So when you combine all of these impacts together, cattle and meat production in general come up to 15% of total CO2 emissions.
We've all been asking to reduce fossil fuels and to electrify and to get off coal. And it seems like we're not making progress fast enough. That's what your report says too. And it's unclear whether we did all those things, whether it would in fact make enough of a difference, because the solutions that we are developing also have environmental costs. So it's not like, these things like electricity is a perfect environmental solution, because it also impacts our environment in many ways. Our lithium batteries impact the environment. Pretty much every solution has its drawbacks, and this makes me wonder personally, as somebody who lives in the world, should I be doing a lot more? Should I really be overhauling my life to make a difference? And should everybody else be doing that too? Should we really radically change the way that we live and work to help stop climate change?
Well, it would be fantastic if everyone felt like you did, and we could do that. But that would be pretty far stretched to envision that the whole globe is going to do that. So I think the bigger point is to take the steps that we personally can so that we feel good about ourselves and we're not in the state of climate anxiety. And part of that is a point that Johan Rockström made in his recent film on breaking boundaries. And he made this point not too far from the end, that whereas it can seem really overwhelming to get to 50% reduction of the fossil fuel production that we currently have by 2030, that if you think about that, all we really need to do is reduce our emissions by 7.5% per year. And if we do 7.5% per year and compound that until 2030, we will be at the 50% reduction. And so I think in order to not get overwhelmed, I like to think of that analogy. But it does still make the point that in order to get to the situation where it's 2029 and we still need to be at 50% reduction and we are caught in the headlights, we really do need to start now so that we can just be thinking of as 7.5% per year. And that's the importance of starting now.
Got it. And it makes it more feasible and less scary to think about it that way.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to clarify, in my previous question is by sort of doing something different with the way we live, we're all still driving cars, and whether we drive a gas-powered car or an electric car, we will be driving cars. We're all still buying our lattes. We're all still, buying containers, plastic containers. Even though we feel deeply about the climate crisis. And so that's sort of what I mean about, like, should we be pushing not just for electrification, but should we be pushing for radically changing the way we shop, the way we live, the way we buy, the way we use public transit or not? Because those things really do make a difference.
Yes,
and maybe, some people are not going to want to, give up their plastic container or coffee cup, but a lot of people would, I think. But I don't feel like we've made a push for that in that direction, to reduce consumption. And your report does criticize excessive consumption. So can you talk a little bit more about that and how excessive consumption fits into this crisis and what we can do about it as, individuals, really?
Yeah, that certainly on an individual level, everyone can think about excessive consumption. I try to take my class every year to the landfill because there's nothing like watching for a half an hour every individual coming up with their pickup and then whole semi trucks all lined up to bring all the stuff to the landfill. And we need to be aware, not just when we're at the landfill, viscerally watching it happen, but we need to transfer that to when we are at the store, that everything that we bring out of a store and put into our car and bring into our house, whether that's a hot tub or furniture or clothing, it depending on the timeline, all that stuff is going to end up in a landfill. So we really need to consider buying less, using less, buying things for keeps, whether that's clothing There's lots of nice videos on, the T-shirt that was bought and worn once and what its life cycle was like. And I have this one video of a woman in California where she has 16 clothing items. So whenever she has to pack, she just swoops them all into her bag. And, she has all these different ways that she can wear various articles of clothing. And her whole family is a low, low clothing family, low clothing consumption family. But that's true of clothing, cars, vacations. Staycations are a great idea. It would be a great idea for a business to start if you're young. Most states have beautiful, especially Oregon. Oh my gosh, we can have wonderful vacations staying right here where we are. Also, food waste is one of the top 4 of the Project Drawdown. And anything we can do to waste less food is going to have a huge impact. And if you're looking for a way to make a difference in your community, those are all things that you can do to get involved and help with sustainability in your own community.
Mm-hmm. And in your own home. Yeah. Thank you for those. I really appreciate those because I think those are things that we all can look at and make a change personally. We don't need international treaties to do that.
Right.
So, speaking of international treaties, though, and international cooperation, the big next international conference, COP28, is going to take place in Dubai at the end of this month and early December. Can you talk a little bit about this gathering? They take place on a regular basis. What can we expect to happen there?
Okay, so this COP28, that means the Conference of the Parties, and it's when the United Nations holds this Conference of the Parties. They invite all nations of the world to come together to make decisions on what we should do about climate change. And it's an essential conference. It's been happening since the early 1990s. And in 2015 was the conference that came up with the Paris Agreement, where all countries in the world have agreed to keep global temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius and hopefully below the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. So it's essential. Without these Conference of the Parties meetings held by the United Nations, we wouldn't be able to get anywhere at all. So although all countries agreed that they would like to hold temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius, each country made their own pledge for how they would go about doing that. And so at this particular conference that's coming up, the main goal is that every country has to come and say, well, this is what we pledged and this is what we did. So it's been, I think in 2016 is when the Paris Agreement went into effect, because it took a while for everyone to agree. And so it's been, I guess, 7 years since then. And that's the point, is to take stock of the progress and the lack of progress, and then make new commitments to how we can do better, which countries did well, learn from the countries that did well, see how they did it, and be able to make new commitments going forward to what will be what commitments will be made in the future. So it's a very important meeting, and we're very lucky to have it processed.
Did they put out a report, or do they put out a report or have a website?
There's a website, and you can learn about it's more of a website. Yeah. The IPCC puts out reports every 5 years on the state of the science, but the Conference of the Parties mainly has a website.
Got it. I want to learn, let me rephrase it again. I want to end on a more positive note. Is there any good news? Have we done anything right thus far? Something that takes us in the right direction as humanity.
Yes, I would say of our 35 variables that we've been looking at, there are 5 human action factors that are all-time beneficial levels. And those include that we already have more than 20% of the energy production is already renewables. So governments worldwide have declared that they're going to have 100% renewable electricity between the different years between 2030 and 2050. And in 2022, it was a record year with an 8% increase in renewable electricity additions. And key policies were put in place in the EU and in China, and with the US Inflation Reduction Act, which, again, I want everyone to go to rewireamerica.com and be able to save money in your own home by taking advantage of making money of the savings that you can get here in the US. And I would like to also point out a review came out of the literature last year, and they found that 100% renewable energy is feasible worldwide at low cost. So I think that that's low-hanging fruit, and I'm very excited about that. Another factor, I'm going to have 5 here. So the second factor is institutional divestment. So there have been nearly 1,500 institutions with assets nearly 40 trillion that have committed to divesting from fossil fuels. So that has more than doubled since our last report, when there were only 15 trillion in assets that had been divested. So that is a huge leap forward. Our third factor is the greenhouse gases that are covered by a carbon price. So nearly 22% of all CO2 emissions are covered by a carbon price. Now, we need, of course, 100% of all of them, and it needs to be not just CO2, but all greenhouse gases. But the fact that 22% of CO2 is covered is awesome. And unfortunately, the average price across the globe on an emissions basis is still only $23 a ton, and it needs to be more like $75 to $100 a ton to make a difference. And I'd like to call out Sweden and Switzerland as leaders where their CO2 price is already over 100. Our third factor, that was the third, was the greenhouse gases covered by a carbon price. Then the fertility rate, or the births per woman. So certainly population growth is important to consider. As we reached 8 billion people on the planet as of last November in 2022. We're expecting 9.7 billion by 2030 and 10.4 billion by 2050. So if you look over the past 50 years, births per woman have halved. So we are moving in the right direction, and we're at the current low of just under 2.3 births per woman. So we need that number to get down to 2.1 in order to have a stable population. And we advocate for education and jobs for women, which is an example where diversity, equity, and inclusion could really help in solving the climate crisis. And the final positive factor that we're excited about is that there have been over 2,000 governments that cover 1 billion of the Earth's citizens that have declared a climate emergency. So this includes entire nations. It started with Scotland and Wales and the UK, Canada, all of the EU, Japan. 24 entire nations have declared a climate emergency, and any change needs broad support. So it appears that widespread support is in place for the energy transition. So those are my the 5 things that I think are going well. And I also really like to remind people that over the course of the history of the Earth, 100 billion people have lived and died over the history of humans on Earth. And potentially trillions of humans will someday exist, and their fate depends on the choices we make today. So we have the enormous opportunity to make an immense difference for life on planet Earth.
Well, thank you for that. I think we'll all be weighing that for a while. Dr. Gregg, this has been a really important conversation. We'll be following this topic closely in future stories in the Oregonian and online at OregonLive.com. And I'm going to drop a few links to some of the reports and videos that you mentioned in the show notes of this podcast. Thank you so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, please give us a 5-star rating and review an Apple Podcast. It really helps people find the show. So spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time, thank you.